There you go. So yeah, I just went through this. This meme is really appropriate. If you look at what I really do, there is a ton of studying involved. This truly had been one of the hardest things I've done in my life, physically and mentally, and also maintaining a full-time job at IBM, as you know, no small feat. It took me about a year and 4 months. And yeah, there's a lot of work involved in this. I have so much respect. I think that is one thing in understanding what these folks we put our life in their hands every day go through when we travel, and just getting a little piece of that and putting my own life in my hands is has been a super fun, exciting, exhilarating journey. But it's a lot of work. I won't kid you that, but it is so gratifying. So let me go to the next page. A lot of people ask me, like, why the heck would you do this? And I'm no spring chicken. I like to think I am, but I am, I'm on the older side. So I'm Gen X, happily to say, and I've always wanted to do this. And when I talk about why, it's really about that freedom. I've always had the adventure gene, as Kinga said. I go scuba diving, I take pictures, I go up to sharks and take pictures of them. And getting in a plane, someone also asked me, have you ever been afraid when you're learning how to fly? Have you ever been afraid that you would hurt yourself or die? And I'm like, no. I would be, I'm a little more reticent that I couldn't do something right. But did I ever think like, oh shit, I'm gonna die? No, it's not that kind of fear. There's a lot of skill and you build up to it gradually. And you have a flight instructor. I did my first solo, flew by myself. That's your big thing. You get in the plane and fly it around the airport. And I had about 20 hours on that. And some students do it in what? I think like 10. So, it's really a skill building thing, and you learn to trust yourself, and that's part of it. The other point is connection. Is I feel more connected. I love the world underwater and connecting with that world, but looking at our beautiful planet and all that we have in front of us. In this, you'll see a lot of these, all these pictures are from California and West. It is an amazing place we live. If you'll see, I've put the airports names in most of these pictures, but you'll see Point Reyes there, which is the westmost point in the Bay Area. And then you'll see things like Yosemite. If you can't see it, Half Dome is kind of over up until the top to the right, and El Capitan is right in front of the window there. So lots of reasons to do this. I highly advise it. And there's, a lot of influence, a lot of excitement that I feel in being part of this group called the 99s. Only 7% of pilots are women. And Amelia Earhart started the 99s in 1929 with a group of 99 women. And it is still a pretty exclusive club. And we don't want to keep it that way. We want to open it up to so much more women. And there's so many support groups like through Facebook and social out there that it's really a great community. I'd heartily recommend, if you have any interest in it, explore it, talk to me. I also, Kinga said I was an engineer. I wanted to be an astronaut. I saw Judith Resnick speak. So if you do the math, you can figure out when that was. But she actually wrote my personal letter back when we did that kind of thing. And sadly, as you might recall, she was killed in the Challenger disaster. But she was a pilot, as the Wall Street Journal wrote an article, a pilot with the looks of a stewardess. Think about that, writing that back in the 80s. But that's what women were dealing with. She was an engineer, had a PhD. She was a pilot. She flew the frickin' space shuttle. So my inspiration, and that is why. Okay, so let's get into it. Reason number 11, and I have to warn that I'm giving this little talk for the first time, and I want to write a blog about it. But so bear with me. We'll have 11 is the number I went with on the lessons I learned. And I'm going to start with crosswinds can be fun. If the first thing you learn about fundamentally in flying is it's all about the wind. You know, when you fly, it affects everything, how you take off, how you land. So you absolutely have to be aware. And we learn so much about weather, and we are constantly checking where the wind's coming from, because that is pretty much what determines, how you fly, how you land, if you're going to take any alternative routes. I've got about 600 landings under my belt now, and I can say I'm still practicing. A crosswind landing is still one of the hardest things you can do because the wind coming right at you is relatively easy. You definitely don't land with a tailwind or take off with a tailwind, but if it's coming from a little from the side, it's going to unbalance you. And if you think about that in terms of leadership, I mean, the conditions are never perfect. When you fly, the wind is always doing something and it's always changing. And that's kind of how you think about how our life in business is, right? It's that nothing is ever perfect. You have to learn how to turn the plane, how to angle it. You have to be constantly in touch with what the weather is doing. You have to know what your plane is doing. So there's a lot of that. You're constantly adapting and you're constantly practicing. Like I said, 600 plus, or 577, 78 as of today landings, and every crosswind landing is still like, okay, am I turning the right way? Which way is the wind coming? So I'd say, it's the same way with leadership. You're always adjusting, and sometimes it's harder than others. So, oh, you know what I forgot to do is this was actually a video, and I'll try and play these now when I talk. I'll try and remember, but this is over Bodega Bay. Um, and if you know the Bay Area, it's a beautiful area on our Sonoma coast here. This is not a crosswind landing. This is a steep turn. If you could look at the dials there, you'd see I'm at 45 degrees. Now that is one of the funnest things you could do in a plane is have your, if you have a friend take you out and say, let's do a crosswind, let's do a steep turn. Crosswind landings are a little harder to predict, but steep turns are always my favorite. Okay. Number 10, plan your cross country. One of the biggest joys that you work up to when you fly is your cross country solo flight. That is the first time you fly by yourself to a new airport that you've never seen, you've never been to. So honestly, the first and hardest thing you have to do is find it. And it's not trivial. And when you learn how to do this planning, you do it all on paper. You do it with paper charts. You do it with a slide ruler like thing called an E6B. And it is, all the stuff that our predecessors have refined and done over the years to make this safe. Now, yes, of course, now we use GPS, and yes, you just have to punch in autopilot. We actually have autopilot in the plane we fly, and you think it's easy. But the idea is there's so many variables. You have to plan manually. Do you have enough fuel? Do you know how far you're going? Another important thing is weight and balance. Have you calculated the weight of the fuel, the weight of the people, the weight of the baggage to make sure that you have enough? Do you know what alternate airports are? Do you know what the weather is going to be when you get there? So this example, we're flying over it's really Southern California, Mojave Spaceport. Next time we want to land there, but it's where the Virgin Galactic space shuttles, not shuttles, but they take off from there. Really wanted to just fly there and we'll land next time, but you have to plan and you think about it. It's kind of like as a leader, when you're planning when you're going for the distance, you have to know all these things. What can my team do? What are their capabilities? Do we have enough funding, aka fuel? If I can't go to the airport I plan to go to, where do I go to? If I can't take that market, how am I going to adjust? So there's a lot of things that goes into that kind of thoughtful, how do I get it done? How do I ensure that I know where I'm going, that I can get there? And if something goes wrong, how do I change? Every leader, when you start out on a journey, either physical or in a business, you need to do that planning. All right, let's see. I know there's a video in here somewhere, so let me try it. There's lots of pilot adages, and like IBM, lots of abbreviations that the FAA likes to use. One of my favorite ones is confess, climb, conserve fuel, communicate, and comply. And that is particularly if you were lost. And especially in the old days. I mean, now we're so much luckier. We have GPS, but what if, your iPad dies? What if your radio dies in your plane? You still have to be able to figure out where you're going. And I kind of look at that in terms of as a business leader, if you all of a sudden are in the middle somewhere and you don't know where to go, you first have to admit it. That's the confess. So many pilots are like, no, I'm not lost. I'm going to keep going. And that's when they would get into trouble. But that's the idea is, you climb to get a better view where you are. If you're low, you don't get as much purview to where you are. you want to absolutely start understanding if you're lost, where's the nearest airport? And now I can just flip a switch on my radio and it shows me nearest airport and distance. But in the old days, pilots didn't know, they would have to pull out their paper map and look at it in the plane. I think that's hard in a car. You should try it in a plane. Anyways, communicate, talk to radio. There's always a radio emergency channel you can talk to, and then follow their directions. So I kind of look at that in terms of if you if something happens to where you as a leader, your team, you're kind of confused, you don't know how you're aligned, and this happens, you may be in the middle of doing your job and all of a sudden a competitor does something, or the market conditions change and you're like, you know what we're doing is not really working. I don't think we really know where we're going. You need to admit that and then create a plan that allows you to get further. And again, I think of it a lot in terms of startups as well. As you got to, if you're all of a sudden working on something that one of your customers says, that doesn't work, you got to admit it, and you got to look at your funding and say, do I have enough funding, aka fuel, and then let's figure out as a team, let's communicate and figure out how we can get back to where we need to get. The next one. All right, this is a fun one, and this is the one on the right is ultimately one of my favorite pictures. It's one of those sunset pictures. You can see the fog coming in, and this is on the Sonoma Coast again, up here where I learned to fly in Healdsburg. And I just love the days when the sun is playing on the clouds. Now, the type of license I got, the initial license you get is called Visual Flight Rules, so VFR. And that means I can't fly in clouds. So, you very much plan your route and look at the weather. And if there's clouds, you figure out how to get around them. Now, this concept of scud running is something even a good pilot has been known to do. It's essentially you're trying to outrun the weather. So this happens a lot, I think, in the Midwest where storms come in more quickly. Here we don't have thunderstorms, but we have the fog. But it's basically you keep descending to stay out of the clouds. So, you could descend so far as to where you're going to run out of room to descend. So then you run into problems. Can you turn around and go back? No, because the weather's behind you or it's in front of you. That's the concept of scud running, kind of trying to outrun the weather and get below the clouds. So, it's really the concept of you continue to make bad decisions. And that's a lot. I think one of the charts in here will definitely address decision making is, as a leader, if things aren't going right, if you feel like you're not making the progress, if you're not, going where you need to, if something is awry, don't keep making bad decisions because you feel like you still have to get there. And that's a lot of what, this pilot adage is about. If you don't have to get there. You can turn around, find another airport, go in another direction. And as a leader, you have to just admit it and not make bad decisions. And, or if you think or keep, making bad decisions after another. So that's kind of the idea there on just keep the options open, that you can turn around, that you can stop and regroup and reassess, but don't try and outrun the weather. All right, another one. This has got to be my favorite. And if you see pilots with t-shirts, you'll probably see this sometime on a t-shirt. Aviate, navigate, communicate. And what that essentially means is that communicate succinctly, clearly, and often. And yes, there is very specific rules as to how often you talk, who you talk to, what you say. And these pictures that I put up here are some of the busiest airspaces in the country, if not the world. LA area, we are flying out of Van Nuys, and you can see Santa Monica Airport somewhere off in the distance. I don't know if the video already ran past it. I went to Arizona where I grew up. So that's the Glendale one with the mountain in the middle. And of course the Bay Area. And yeah, that's SFO. These busy airspaces are called Bravo. Like be busy for Bravo. And you can't even go into it unless you have the right kind of equipment on your plane. And yes, you have to get specific clearance to go in. So this is about 2,000 feet above the ground, staying to the west of 101 and talking to San Francisco Tower, which is such a thrill to go past these busy airspaces. And sometimes when you go through them, they let you fly right over the runway like we did in San Jose and Oakland. And I think if Kiefer's on the phone, she'll remember that we flew right over the Oakland airport at like 1,500 feet over the numbers, because you can do that because you're talking to them. You remember that?
Yes, that was
Yes.
awesome.
So this whole idea is, it's pretty much the adage for business. Keep where you're going. Aviate first. Keep the bus running down the road. Keep the plane flying. Get that fine and perfect and keep it going. Then if you have to make changes in direction, do that. And then communicate. That's kind of the priority of what you do when you fly. And I'd say pretty much when you're flying your company or your team as well. Make sure you know how to fly it, make sure that's safe, make sure you know how to get where you're going, and then communicate outwards to people. And so that's that adage there. But it's really, it's a way of just prioritizing your workload, which is, they also talk a lot about that in your pilot life. And as you get more advanced, you're able to multitask and do those different things, but always keep your priorities straight. Don't communicate if you're not flying the plane safely. And that's kind of the same thing. Don't need to communicate if you can't keep your team, your business running along the track there. So that's the lesson there. All right, this photograph on the right is actually compliments of Kiefer. We were flying over the Golden Gate Bridge. You can see that little plane that went under us. And this is, of course, other pictures of the lovely Bay Area. I fly here all the time. We are so blessed to be living in this beautiful area. And I just can't ever get enough of showing people this or taking people up and saying, look at the world we live in. This city is beautiful and amazing. So aeronautical, someone had a question?
Yeah, Rosie, I had a question, and it was I'm sorry to take you back to the previous chart, but it stuck in my brain. The communicate part. Were you talking about do not communicate externally until you've got your ducks all in a row?
Yeah.
Was that? Oh, okay, got it.
That's pretty much the idea, is you need to be flying the plane. You need to be knowing where you're going, and focus on that task. So as a leader, I think it's sometimes you can over communicate. So as a leader, you need to have your ducks in a row to ensure that, people aren't changing direction or, making a call based on some erroneous information. Because the most important thing is that you're still flying the plane or running the ship. That's my thinking there.
Yeah, great. No, I get it. It has to do, the way I'm hearing you say it is like, make sure you have your business straight and aligned. And then you go out there and say, this is what we're doing, this is where we're going, this is how we're doing it. And then everybody is going to understand and follow suit, rather than start communicating haphazardly without really having a direction, and then changing your direction and then confusing everybody.
Yeah, and it's also workload. It's like, you first, in this case, they mean it by workload as a pilot. If there's a problem, you fly that plane first. And it's similar, I think, to what you're saying. But it's also, you need to figure out what you're doing. And you're right, you don't want to constantly be saying or trying to communicate first before you know where you're going or what's going on or what you're doing. So I think you captured it well. All right. Okay, so back to stick and rudder skills. So they used to really, pilots used to really train, the rudder, of course, is the thing in the back that controls your around your z-axis, so your direction, your yaw, and the stick is the thing that flies the plane, the yoke, so to say. And they spent a lot of time saying, gosh, if you can do that really well, you're a good pilot. But what they found after they did research of plane accidents and pilots over, I think this was several decades, in the 70s, probably 70s, 80s, 90s, that they found that the pilots were, taking off and making decisions that weren't safe either. So by the time I got to training, this had really become a standard. It's called ADM, aeronautical decision making. Is that they want to teach pilots how to make really good and safe decisions so that you can always know, have enough information, get enough information before you actually go to fly the plane. Because it's great if you know how to land a plane and fly it, and great, you can do that, but you make a bad decision and fly into bad weather, or try and land in an airport that has a dangerous situation like a bad crosswind or, wind shear or something. That is a lot of times what happens. Or people, you'd be surprised how many of these accidents people just plainly run out of fuel. You're like, how could that happen? And it's because of this continued bad decision making. So they spend a lot of time. The FAA flipped it in the early 2000s to teach this aeronautical decision making. And, because as the adage says, it's always optional to take off, landing is not. So you have to be able to make that decision. And I think the way I interpreted that as a leader is that so many leaders, that good or bad, and in a lot of cases, they use pure force and persona, or a lot of even they call this out as a pilot bad habit is the macho-ness of, oh, don't worry, I can do it. It can't happen to me. That's actually one of the pilot personalities. They have you understand that could happen to you. So I kind of look at that in terms of leadership too, is how you make decisions, how you look at all the information, how you take all of that and internalize it is just as important of just sheer force of getting people to do stuff, or using your, hey, I know I'm right. I know this. I don't need to go and check the data. I don't need to do this. So all of this kind of, of course I know it. Of course, I'm the leader. I'm the CEO. I'm the manager, is balanced with, let me look at the data. Let me make sure I'm taking into account everything I need to make that decision. So that is a really important thing that has saved and changed the pilot training. And I'd say saved quite a bit of lives over the years, and really changed the dynamic so that, I would say actually as I learned older in life, I probably am doing many, many fewer dumb things than what I've done if I was younger. And I'm just more skilled. And so I feel like that comes into play too as part of that aeronautical decision making. It's take all your data into account and your personal assessment and your personal attitude as well. All right. Okay, so here's some more great views of let's see, yes, these are all in the lovely state of California. Can't ever get enough of flying over Sonoma County, Bodega Bay. Columbia is this little airport in the Sierra foothills that we went to recently. That's kind of on the way to Yosemite. Of course, Monterey Bay. And Joshua Tree is one of my favorite places in the world, which we'll see more of later. Know your personal minimums, and that's simply part of this aeronautical decision making, which is a key part. Know what you can do and know what your limits are physically and mentally. And as I said before, don't even take off if the wind is beyond your capability. Don't think, well, the weather will get better. Oh, it's going to be better by the time I land. Like, you need to know all these things. You need to know how the visibility is. And it's surprising when you're down here on the ground, you're like, oh, it's great, but you get up in the air and you can't find the airport that you're looking for because there's low vis. They even have things like taking into account how much sleep you've had. What's your mental state? Have you, what kind of medication are you taking? So all these are part of that. And knowing, like, geez, I'm not going to fly if I've had less than 6 hours of sleep because I don't feel I'm going to be as aware. Those are the kinds of things that really take into account. So as a leader, you also need to do that, right? You need to understand what your limits are, what your team limits. And sometimes it's just not okay to push those because, you have to be completely honest and have discussion before you try and do something that you may not be able to do. And, as a leader, I'm saying in business, but also, if you're taking a group on, if you're simply doing, taking your family on a hike, you're the leader of the family, and, are you sure that, everybody has, do you know what everybody's personal minimums are? Do you know what your skill level is if you're taking on something physical? And then mentally, it's the same thing. So that's kind of that's my thinking there on, always be aware of what those are. It's okay to push yourself, but know and have hard and fast limits, especially in things um, that are dangerous. How much, and I think in leadership and some of the things with teams is how hard can I push my team? How much can I push the reliability of this product? Is it really ready to launch? And I come to this question a lot when I was doing product management of, do we launch at the risk of being, having a big customer issue? Or do we wait until it's safer? In this case, safer meaning that the product is more robust or the quality is better. So that's how I'd look at that one. All right. This is another great adage for pilots. And if you Google airplane go-arounds, you will see a whole lot of funny videos, and not so funny because these are big jets that even go around. And I'm sure all of you have probably been on a plane where you're on an approach to a big airport and you go around. You're like, oh, you're probably like, something's wrong. What happened? They teach you this, that it's really, really important to not look at it as a failure, no judgment. Because some of the worst decisions are made when you're like, I got to get this on the ground. It'll be, I got to do this. And it is so easy when you're landing because you're landing at a speed where you're still able to fly. You're not going to stall the airplane, to just push the power forward, level the plane, and go around. There could be an animal on the runway. There could be another plane. It could be a car that's driving across. It could be you just don't like the wind because it bumped you a certain way and your wings are just keep flying the plane. And the important thing there is don't make judgment. It has to be right. You are the pilot, you decide what that is. And I think, this gets back to that same thing about launching the product. Oh my gosh, if I don't launch the product now, it's going to be a failure. But yeah, what if if the product crashes and burn? I've been on quite a few product launches over my career where you launch something and your reputation is damaged. Your customer loses confidence in you. It would have been much easier to make that call to say, you know what, we're not ready. We're going to delay. Let me make that call. There's no, shame in that. So the most important thing is you can always make that call to go around. In this case, delay a product launch, for example. So, and these lovely airports this is my home airport in Healdsburg. And you can see the airport there off the right to the wing. And then the back, if you look at the mountain in the back, that's Mount St. Helena. And this is lovely wine country. You can see all the vineyards. And the other one on the right is that Columbia Airport I told you about in the Sierra foothills. So lots of pretty places to go around. And I've done them many times. All right, let's see. I know there's a video here. This is a really funny adage that it was actually one of an inspirational things that was in one of my women pilot learning groups. It's like whenever you feel like the world is against you, like it's going to be too hard, like all the winds are pushing you back, like everything's pushing you back. Remember, the planes take off in a headwind. And just remember that in life, whenever you feel like everything is pushing against you, keep in mind that sometimes that may be the best opportunity to get airborne, because that's how a plane does it. The more wind coming at you, rushing over your wings, it's going to make your takeoff, actually faster, and you can get airborne sooner, because that's what you're going for, is that lift that's coming straight at you, perpendicular to the wind. And, don't always think of a headwind as a bad thing. Remember, planes do that and take off into the wind, and that's the optimal condition. So yeah, this video here is flying for the first time into my hometown of Phoenix, Arizona. Flew into this airport in Glendale, and Yeah, just a lot of fun going into places that you've never been before and figuring out, there's very specific rules on how you land and who you talk to and how high you fly. So it's all very prescribed. That's the good thing. It's not just random people flying into airports. You have a lot of rules. Um, and of course, this is Sedona, Arizona. I went there a lot as a teenager, so it was very special to take a flight there. It's just amazingly beautiful. And then our lovely Sonoma Coast, Point Arena. I think it's Sonoma. Maybe it's Mendocino. Anybody know? It's right on the border if it is.
Mendocino.
Okay, yeah, I said it was
This is really
Mendocino.
fun, Rosie. Like, I feel like as somebody who's about to leave California for another state, I'm just seeing all these places that I've been a million times from a whole new vantage point.
Oh, I tell you, that is the amazing wonder of it. I mean, yeah, I could just fly around all day and look at the world from this perspective. And California is one of the most beautiful. I just have to say it's phenomenally beautiful. We are so lucky to live here. Where are you moving to?
The Nashville area.
Oh no, wow,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's far.
It's far. Yeah.
That is far. All right. Okay, this is one of my favorites. Um, and this is probably the most important thing to your success. And if I'm ever stressed in a plane, and when I was learning, fly the numbers. The airplanes are tested and rated to fly at specific speeds. When you take off, it's at a specific speed. When you land, when you're doing this coming into an airport, you do a little rectangle around the runway called the pattern. You do it at 1,000 feet, usually above the runway. You make the calls, you tell people I'm on right base where I'm turning here, which is that, kind of flat leg perpendicular to the runway. You fly the numbers. And here, this is especially a meaningful video to me because it is the first flight. My husband and I got our pilot's licenses together within a day of each other. So he got it and then I got it. And then this was our first flight ever together in the plane. We had never flown together because we were always in this little two-seater with our instructor. So here we are coming in over the water at this airport we'd never been to for the first time. And we're both just like, we know exactly what speed we're at. He's looking at my speed. I'm looking at my speed. We know where the flaps are supposed to be. And that's all you do is you let the plane, it flies if you fly the number. And you don't have to worry about that. If you know what speed you are at landing, you know when you're taking off, that's exactly how it happens. And it's really prescribed. And we say that often to ourselves, fly the numbers. And I think it's also a perfect metaphor for leaders to keep in mind. Just to know, no matter how hard or scary things get or how situations change. I mean, honestly, in business these days, things change so fast. The metaphor for the wind is always, it could be against you, it could be a tailwind. You can use those to your advantage. And remember, if you're flying the numbers that your team can perform, your product can scale to, the plane is not going to fall out of the sky. And that's the main thing I keep saying, when people say, were you ever thinking you would, hurt yourself? And I'm like, no, because I am flying those numbers. I know what those are for my plane. They're different for every plane, by the way. Like I think what was I landing in? The plane I fly now, I land at 78 knots, which is what, about 85 miles per hour, maybe 80, 85 miles per hour. And I just know as long as I'm at that number, I know how fast it's going to go. I know what the performance is. I'm not afraid that anything's going to happen. And that's basically a metaphor for, kind of for my life is like, if I push myself, if I push the plane, if I push myself in my job, as long as I know what those performance numbers are, and that's my personal performance numbers on what I can do, I'm going to be fine. And sometimes I have to say that in my head, even when I'm, taking on a new role. Like I think most of you know, I took on a new role recently. It's a leadership role in the garage. And have I done the job before? Nope. But can I fly the numbers? Do I know that I have all the infrastructure? Do I know what I'm capable of? Sure. And so, keep those limits in your mind when you're running your business, when you're taking on your next challenge, and everything will be fine. At least that's what I tell myself. So mental dialogue we have with ourselves.
You know, the thing
Mhm.
that is interesting to know when you know Rosie is that when she talks about numbers, she knows the numbers. She is very, very detail oriented. And so I think part of the lesson for me in hearing her say this is you've got to be detail oriented. You've got to understand those numbers. And then if you understand them, then you just fly them, as she says. I love that.
Yeah, and performance numbers on your, and think about it when we're looking at our reports in marketing, our reports in product performance. In the new role, it'll be more on staffing and, what the team can do, what their capabilities are. Know what those are. And it all works together and it all comes together. But you have to absolutely know those limits of your team, what your numbers are for performance for your campaign. All of those are part of those numbers. But yeah, I love that part of flying. It's a very technical number-based opportunity. So, all right. I made you watch that again, but I meant to click to the next slide. Come on. One more time. There we go. Number one thing about leadership that getting my license taught me is that you are the pilot in command. And Kinga again knows this, that I've used the PIC term quite often. It stands for pilot in command. And it's basically, as a leader, ultimately you're responsible. And if anything was to happen, or if I was to do some, break some ATC rule, it's all on me. If I'm to make a decision about whether to land the plane or go around, it's about me. If I'm going to take off or not, I make that call. And that's the responsibility that you as a contract have with the license, with your pilot's license, is that you are the one responsible for making those flight decisions and for making safe decisions. You can also call, that's the other thing is if you have a problem, and you say you have an emergency, ATC will do everything they can to help you get on the ground safely. But you make that call whether it's an emergency or not. I remember once we took off and one of our doors was slightly ajar. And as soon as we got up in there, we're like, oh, crap. And so I called ATC. I said, we got to come back. We're still on the downwind. We're on the downwind leg parting, and we have a imminent, our doors slightly ajar, an imminently going to open. He's like, would you like to come back right now? I'm like, no, we can do kind of a regular approach. So, you make that call. I could have said, you know what? I need to get on the ground right away. It's too dangerous. I'm going to turn right now. And he would stop all the other traffic coming in. So, but you make that command. And that's, as a leader, you ultimately know that things come up to you. You make the decision. You have all the information. And somebody go on mute. I think I hear some background noise. Thank you. But ultimately, you as the leader make those calls. And, there's a lot of collaboration that goes on, in when I'm flying, talking to ATC, similar with your teams, getting all the information, making that good ADM call, aeronautical decision, do we go, do we launch our product, do we launch our campaign, is it right timing? But ultimately it comes down to you make that decision. And it's a hell of a lot of fun. That's all I can say. I have some other pictures here that I can finish up with, and then you guys can ask some questions. But yeah, that's my story of my license. It was a lot of work, but worth every minute. And look here's Mount St. Helena. Here's fall and where we got our license at Healdsburg. I see a little airport there. There's some more San Francisco pictures. Our bay, can't get enough of this. Catherine will miss you going to the going to Nashville. But I mean, San Francisco is just amazing. And I can't wait to take people up and show them this amazing, beautiful view. And this is all at our doorstep. This is flying over the city. As you notice, I'm flying right over downtown and literally in the San Francisco airspace. Actually, I think this is right before the San Francisco airspace. They have it set up so that you can do the Bay tour without getting into the San Francisco Bravo airspace, as we said. But you can fly right over downtown and take this video. And as long as you're 1,500 feet above and 2,000 feet horizontally away from, you're able to do that. It's amazing where you can go. And I think this is my last one. When I started my adventure, I have a really good friend who has a place in Joshua Tree, 29 Palms exactly. And so in my head and on my desk was that goals, KHES, which is Healdsburg, to KTNP, which is 29 Palms. And every time I saw that, and every time I was just like, oh, this is so hard. I'm not, oh, when am I going to find time to do this? And so on the way back from Arizona, we landed in 29 Palms, and we're going to probably be going back in the next few weeks. And the beauty of it is it's a 3-hour flight from here. We can go any weekend, take off on a Friday night and get there and spend the weekend with our friend who has a very cool place right next to the park. But it's, you know, I can't say enough about how beautiful all the places are in California. So questions for anyone? I think that's all I have.
Hi, Rosie. This is Shenlin. It's a great talk. I love it. I have a
Thank
question
you.
here. Yeah, sometime when we, starting new project or new team, the assumption is we're taking risk, right? So when you're on the airplane in the sky, how do you handle risk?
Great question. And thank you so much for joining. Shinlin is on my new team. And I so appreciate that you joined. It's that aeronautical decision making. It's assess all the risks before you even get off the ground. And I would say that, like, if we're starting out a client engagement, Shinlin, and this is what we're doing, I don't know if the folks on the call know the garage, but we're doing 4 to 6, maybe 8-week short-term engagements of building MVP, minimum viable products for customers. And that's certainly the case of, you know, how do you assess what the product is and how much you promise to deliver to the customer? And it comes down to, you know, I'm not even gonna, first of all, I'm not even gonna get on, you know, take off. Remember, takeoff is optional, landing is not. I'm never gonna do that unless I have all the information I feel to make a safe decision. And if I get in the air, and this happens all the time, especially flying to someplace like Phoenix or 29 Palms, you go through multiple weather patterns in the state of California. I've sent Kinga endless maps of the the maps and how the winds are doing. Have an alternate airport. So I guess that's part of it. Chinlin is like, have an alternate plan and make the call. Again, you're pilot in command. If you don't feel comfortable landing, if the wind is not right, I know my husband was trying to get our plane down to Noss Field, which is notorious for really, really messy winds. Like they could be in 2 different directions and at each end of the runway, which is only like 3,600 feet. And, you know, at the last minute, if you don't feel safe, go land in Petaluma. So you have all that data. And the other thing is when you're in flight, you have all that data at your fingertips. You have other people you can talk to at the airport. You can radio in and hear the weather. You can talk to other pilots. You can look on ForeFlight. But the point is that you will be able to have all that information and minimize your risk. So I wouldn't even land if I thought the winds were not, if it was a really strong crosswind and it was beyond my personal minimum. So you can hear all those, you know, plan your cross country, get all the information, know your personal minimums. I don't like crosswinds that are more than like 10 knots. And I also know my plane won't handle more than 20 knots. But I'm constantly reassessing. If I'm in the air, I'm reassessing at the same time. So it's both on the ground before you take off, and then when you're in the air, get all the data that you can.
Thank you. So if may I allow to ask a second question?
Of course, of course.
So I know you probably constantly communicate with the people on ground, tell you the direction, a bunch of information. So if I think about, I mean, back to the real life, who those people will be in our life guiding us when we're in the sky flying. I mean, for your case, I mean, I assume so when you, I mean, in the sky, how often you talk with the people on the ground to tell you, I mean, check a bunch of information?
It depends. When I'm flying around locally, I don't talk to anybody other than when I'm landing. Because in a controlled airport, you make you talk to people in the pattern, you tell them where you are. And when I go into an airport that has a control tower, they tell me where to come in and when to come in. So, and then if I'm going long distance, I get something called flight following, and then all the controllers are they have me in their system and they're monitoring me and they hand me off along the way. So if I'm going, so I'm constantly in touch with someone then. But you can also, there's an emergency channel, 121.5. You just, if you have emergency, you just put that channel on and you know, Mayday, Mayday. And it's always being monitored. So how often you talk, it depends.
But-
You know.
Okay. But it's more like you reach out to them, right? So whenever you need information, you reach out to them, or they automatically reach out to you.
When I'm on flight following long distance, they're tracking me and they're telling me, I'm not usually talking to them. If
Okay.
I'm not on flight following, like if I'm just flying around a local place, I talk to people only when I'm landing, if you can believe that or not.
I see. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. Any other questions?
I had a question, Rosie, and I did miss the beginning. But did you talk? I know this is a sort of a new thing for you. It's not like you've been flying for the last 20 years.
I wish I had though.
Yeah. So are you, and you probably told everybody this, are you at a place where you kind of rent by the hour whatever plane you're going to use, or how does that work?
Yes, you can rent by the hour. At our flight school, they have rental planes. When we were learning, they have a two-seater trainer that they do most of the training on. And then you
Okay.
can rent other planes from them as well.
Okay. And is it cost? I mean, it's obviously not totally cost prohibitive because you're doing it, but is it something that like the cost of getting involved in something like this is you really have to be ready for a huge commitment, or are there kind
Um,
of doable ways to approach it?
it depends. If, I was a younger student doing it full time, I could probably do it for, I don't know, $10,000 or $12,000, I think, maybe even less, depending on the schools and where you are in the country. But for us, it cost us, I think, because I took 120 hours and you could do it in 40 hours.
Ah, uh-huh.
So if you multiply it times, the plane usage plus my instructor time, I think it came out for us $25,000 or so each of
Okay.
us.
Each
So
of
it's not, I mean, it's a commitment, but it's not totally outrageous. And that's just for my private. Now there's all sorts of levels. Like we want to go on to get our instrument so we can fly in clouds and get out of the airport in the fog. But I mean, there's also schools that give you a degree and they will teach you at different prices. But yeah, it really ranges. I've heard people do it for $10,000 or such, depending on how fast they do it. And if they're younger, they could do it in 40 hours. I'm working full time. Took me
Right,
120.
right. Yeah, yeah.
It's achievable. And I only wish, like I said, someone asked me any regrets. I'm like, yeah, that I didn't do this 20 years ago. Of course, time and money, it's not a trivial commitment. Let's just put it that way. And it's okay. I just love to watch these landings. I'm always critiquing it too. But anyways, I have tons more pictures and stories, but the other joke is, how do you know if there's a pilot at the party? Answer is, don't worry, she'll tell you. They'll tell you. So that's the other thing, is I could go on and on because it has been such a fun and hard journey. I wouldn't have it any other way.
Rosie, thank you so much for putting this together for Waymo and for this group of people. For me, it was a lot of fun to learn about the leadership lessons, but also watch all these pictures and videos. So thank you very much.
You're
And I
welcome.
see there's a lot of comments in the chat with people thanking you and letting you know how fascinating and how fun it was. So
Oh,
thank
good.
you.
Thanks. Thank you for inviting me. Oh, somebody's asked me about the Kobe crash in high level. So I read a lot about that. And if someone wants to stay on, if you're still on, maybe. They had a pilot who was super experienced. He was probably he probably got disoriented, even though he was experienced, because he was flying in clouds in the fog, in the coastal fog down there, and there was mountains. So it's very easy to get disoriented, and that's the kind of the next level of training that we'll go through. You fly when you're not looking out the window. You fly looking at instruments, and you trust your instruments. And I suspect there's a lot of what I read about it is that it was just you know, as experienced as he was, he got disoriented, and he probably shouldn't have. We probably should have made a call to go in a different area that wasn't near the mountains, or to fly into the airport. It was probably okay to fly. The decision to take off was okay, but he probably made a couple bad decisions along the way. That's that ADM stuff. So any other questions that I missed there? So glad you guys liked it. Well, thank you.
Yeah, a lot of us agreed that the best date ever is to be flying with your husband.
Yes, yes, it's so fun. And the biggest argument we have is who gets to fly? Because we try and split it, obviously. But it's also really important, I should have put in there, having a really good co-pilot, because we can do so much more together. Maybe I'll add that in at some point. Because there's no way we can navigate the Bravo airspace in LA or Phoenix or San Francisco without someone who knows, who's truly co-pilot in the other seat, is, you know, because you're looking on a map that shows you where the airspace is. You have to make sure when the SFO says stay west of 101 and at 2,000 feet, you better damn stay at that. And they will tell you if you don't. But yeah, I'm looking at the map on ForkFlight, is the app on my iPad. And I'm going, okay, Bravo airspace in 5, 4, 3, you know, I know where it is. Kiefer experienced this firsthand, I have to say. And she was a great passenger. And as we were yelled at by ATC, stay below 1,500. She heard that, so it was fun. Can't wait to take you all up.
Awesome. Well, with
Thanks.
that, thank you so much. Thank you all for participating and for joining us today. And again, if you are even half as passionate as Rosie about something and want to share it with other people in IBM, you'll find that there'll be people listening to you the way that you've all listened to Rosie. So don't be shy. Come on, share what you know, share what you love, and join Waymo Tuesdays. And Rosie, thanks again for putting this together.
Well, thank you so much
Really
for having
appreciate
me. I really appreciate the invite. Thank you.
All right, everyone. With that, I am going to stop the recording and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.